Say, how it works is depending on the flow of conversation, Dave will ask Dr. Jog questions and Dr. Jog might ask questions back to Dave. It's the heat. I feel it.
And don't forget, he's got initials in front of his name and after his name. So I'm going to put him on the hot seat. No,
we'll have fun with this.
Doctor, it's a pleasure meeting you. And I do have a question that kind of sparks from a couple of the questions I've seen here. So let me set the table for this question and then ask you to respond in a way that helps people understand a little bit more in depth of the services that are provided through you, like the clinics and how people respond to the doctor medical side response to Parkinson's. And the other one is, the other part to that is, I'm going to call it, to be nice, because I got other words for it, alternative medicine. Where in Brazil, for example, somebody claimed the capacity to prey on people with cancer by saying he had a gift that he could reach into your bowels and pull out the cancer. And his clinic was full from people all over the world looking for a silver bullet. And this guy and it was exposed, by the way, so that don't go to Brazil and get this. It was exposed. He had a fake thumb that he would wear when they were filming him, take the thumb off and pour the contents onto the stomach while he was moving it around, put the thumb back on again, and pull out these chicken livers and drop them on the table and say, I just got rid of your cancer. $4,000 a hit. So if he went into your stomach once, that's $4,000. If he said, I think there's more, and he would get more, boom. So that's the extreme on that side, but there are some concerns about alternative medicine, and as a researcher and an expert, can you describe for us concerns that you have and what to watch out for?
Yeah, so excellent. Two questions. By the way, since I'm vegetarian, I pull out tofu, not chicken. Sorry, just to make that clear, because I mean, you got to do what you got to do. So the first thing is about what our clinic provides, and that's it. So the problem with having a huge volume of patients, our waiting list, and many of you know this, I've had people come and complain, is about 1.5 years long, and this is with usually at least 4 fellows. I have 4 fellows who are neurologists. This year we've got 5 who are seeing patients along with a clinic nurse. Norway has a population of 4.5, maybe 5 million, right? We have a population of 3.5 million that come to see us in the clinic. So I have about 3,800, 4,000 Parkinson's patients we look after. So you imagine servicing these patients in the volume of patients that we have. We see on an outpatient basis about 3,800 outpatient visits to just me, let alone my colleague Dr. Jenkins and Dr. McDonald, who also have patients coming in to see them. This is my clinic. So you can imagine that we literally have 15, 20 minutes to provide medical treatment to our patients. And this is with all the complexity of even one drug that we're talking about. So we concentrate as much as possible in dealing with the medical issues in terms of giving counseling as to what cane you might want to use or how it is that a particular food might be modified. There just isn't time. Not because A, we're ignorant, or 2, we don't want to do this. It is just impossible. The same thing is true with phone calls. On a daily basis, our clinic nurse, is only one of them, gets about 30 phone calls a day. Right? It's 2.5 days we're in clinic, which is from 8:30 in the morning to usually 5:30. During that time, it's impossible to answer those phone calls, which means that we've got 2 days to answer 5 days worth of phone calls. So 120 phone calls in 2 days with one nurse answering these phone calls. And you can do the math, just simple arithmetic, as to how many minutes my poor nurse has to, so the fellows answer phone calls as well. The other 2.5 days of my non-clinic days are the science that we do, right? And as you heard just now from Dave, how important that is, these advances that we make are being at the bench. You have to remember that when we do science, and this is something that may not be clear to any of you here, we have to get the money to do the science, right? So we have to write publications and papers to be able to get our science out there. And as I said in my bio, it's inaccurate because we're at over 250 papers. In 15, let's say 20 years, 250 papers. You can do the math. Again, it's 10, 12 publications per year. Each publication takes about 3 months of writing to do. Forget about 4 years of research to get to that point of writing the publication. To be able to do that research, we need to support graduate students and postdocs. A postdoc salary is $65,000. A fellow's salary is $60,000. I have 4 fellows, that's $240,000 that I have to generate. What you may not know is that the government, university, hospital does not pay a single dollar for these fellows. Every dollar. We've trained 26 fellows, so 25 times 50,000. That's what we have managed to put in grant money from all over the world. Why do you think I was in Norway? I was in Norway because with the Norwegian government and the Research Council of Norway, we've got a multi-million euro grant to be able to do science between Norway and Canada. This took a year and a half of tremendous amount of work and writing. The grant application that we wrote was 120 pages long, right? This is not a small little thing to do. In those 2.5 days, we have to do the writing of the grants, we have to make the money, we have to do the science, and then publish all of this. This is the amount of time that we have, which is completely unfunded unless we write these grants. Our burn rate in the business world, in my lab, is $480,000 a year. That's how much I need to make as a bread earner in the clinic to be able to support my fellows, my 11 postdocs and research associates in the lab, right? And just to give you a perspective, we are very happy that we get grants. Parkinson Society of Saskatchewan, Ontario, and their fundraising and the tremendous amount of support I have from them, their graduate student award is $20,000, right? That's the graduate student award. I just told you what our burn rate is from my lab, $500,000. To be able to, and these people are highly qualified, so it's not possible for us to simply hire anybody. These people have PhDs, postdoc research experience. So to maintain that machinery is actually a tremendous amount of work, and it's a problem, Dave, because in all honesty, if people like Penny McDonald or myself, if we were to not do what we do, there's nobody else to fill the shoes. It is that drastic. If I were to retire today, you can imagine all my fellows, all my graduate students and research people and I are gone in one night, right? Which means, yes, this is actually keeps me up at night. I'm not kidding you, because I'm 54, I'll be 55 in a couple of months. My wife is telling me to stop at 60, right? And, she's basically not seen me for the last 27 years. And so, so I occasionally fly back and say, sorry, you're not the puppy. Sorry, hang on. So it is, I'm not joking. I mean, it's literally, I flew back from Norway last night. I was away from I was not here for Thanksgiving because Sunday night I had to go speak. Monday it wasn't their Thanksgiving. Tuesday we had a research meeting. And then the launch of our research center in Norway with the health minister of Norway was actually there. So I have a picture with him, which is very, very nice. The whole meeting was in Norwegian, which was a bit difficult. But other than that, I was away for the 5 days. In 10 days, I'm in Dubai for 10 days because one of our research groups is there. So this is how we're functioning. So to be able to sustain this is not an easy thing. It is very, very hard. Right? And so that's our resources. In terms of offering the other aspects of alternative medicine, this is a very nice spin-off because what we practice is evidence-based. It takes time to collect evidence, and it may not work, right? So after 4 or 5 years of investing time, whether it's animal research or understanding how dopamine works, like in Dr. McDonald's lab, it may not work. With Dr. Pasternak, who's very close to here, all the effort that Steve is putting in trying to come up with Ambroxol, which is a cough suppressant for treatment of cognition. It's been 3-4 years of work, and it may not work, right? And so we have no guarantee that just because we've been doing, but the amount of work that Steve and his team puts in with us to be able to do, this is just 2 examples that I'm giving you. And so to be able to provide alternative therapies, whether it's boxing or something else, it has to be on basis of evidence. The most important part of this is that if I suggest to you that yes, you should do a particular type of exercise, you have to pay for it, right? You have to pay. Somebody has to pay. You want me or our team to suggest treatments that are unvalidated. Why? Because there's a 40% placebo response, right? 40%. So if I were to tell you, you know how much money I would make if I were to come up with a Dr. Jog drink for Parkinson's disease? But it would be fake, right? And this actually happened. I was a fellow with Dr. Lang, and at that time we had Deprenyl, Selegiline, and there was a drink that Morty Schulman had come up with. And he was marketing this drink in Tony's clinic. And poor Dr. Lang, who had been given a grant by the company, had to hand out this drink, which was Morty Schulman's drink for Parkinson's disease. No evidence. So it's a conflict. Either you come to our clinic so that we give you advice about what has evidence, we generate that evidence, or you don't want evidence. I cannot prescribe things, whether they are therapy otherwise, without evidence. Right? So that's what we're striving at. So it's a direct conflict because we're trying to generate it, yet I'm going to advise you, yeah, you should do this particular exercise, go buy this treadmill or something like this. There's no evidence. It may work, but see, data is required for that. That's why we don't tell you, because you have to spend money to do those things. Right?
So let me add to that by asking another question that has been given to us that I can wrap into that topic. The value of nutrition, the value of exercise, the value of all of the things that are quote unquote non-medical,
yes,
if it's fair to say it that way. How much research is actually being done to get an answer for take Tai Chi or go this way or go that way? Is there research being done to help us show evidence that those kinds of things, the right nutrition, is working?
So excellent question. Remember when I said that we have inclusion-exclusion criteria? Well, we also have to have those for the intervention. So the intervention has to be specifically targeted. This I can measure. This is water. It's always H2O. Whether it's in Norway or China or here, that's what it is. When it comes to these alternative, therapeutics, there is no boundary. How much Tai Chi? In whom? What kind of exercise do you do? Do you run on a treadmill for 11 minutes? Well, that depends on whether you've had a hip replacement or not. And so this is to standardize these interventions is extremely hard. When the variables are large in any scientific project, the numbers that you need to recruit astronomically increase. So if I have so let me give you a crude example. Death is a very deterministic endpoint. You are either dead or you're not. I mean, it's a kind of given, right? You can't be, you can be half dead, I suppose, but that's in conversation, but not in reality. But when it comes to the interventions that we're talking about, these interventions are so nebulous that it depends on the individual. Well, you've got genetic heterogeneity, and one of the things that I think as a politician, you guys have to know is that look at the fabric. I mean, I grew up in Kingston. Well, you know, Kingston was one particular kind of people. Look at our fabric that we have today. We've got people that are German, Ukrainian, Arabic, Sikh. You know, one of our candidates is Sikh leader, for God's sake. So we have to determine the mixture of people on whom the intervention, which is also variable, has to be tested. And that's extremely important because the outcome that you measure, if it's not rigorous and the intervention nebulous, then the numbers that you would need would be 10,000, right? So, and these associations are dangerous.
Yes, yes. So the end game on this is if you feel good and you believe and
yes,
have a sense that your physical body is improving by taking Tai Chi, go right ahead.
Absolutely. There you go. Absolutely. Go right ahead. And however, don't go for a fad, right?
Yes, like chicken livers.
Yes.
Like keep chicken livers out of the equation.
The other important thing is that the data can be associated wrong. There was a recent paper that was released on, beta blockers and inhalers and these kinds of things. Retrospective analysis of that data showed that actually the assumptions, even in a good lab, were incorrect. So the data was interpreted wrong. And so, yes, exercise of any type that keeps you healthy, meditation, feels better, anything that you have to pay significant amount of money, question it. Because this is where you're paying out $100. That's why I gave you the drink example. That unless it's validated, is not something that I will ever be able to prescribe. I'm sorry.
Yep. You can ask me that one.
Yes. So the question for you is, do you believe that your brother's diagnosis at his young age benefited him or his abilities in the long run? That's, yeah.
I think that's a psychological question, whether or not my brother early diagnosis would have a positive or a negative impact on him. Once he went through the stages that one goes through in terms of denial, anger, and a few of the other things that we have discovered your mind goes through when you're diagnosed with something that's threatening like that, he today would say, no problem, it's fine. He has been able to do things that he wouldn't have done had it not been for his diagnosis, because he would have went on his merry way, living his life the way he was doing, and didn't have another detour that he had to take. Taking the detour is your choice of how do you respond. That's, in essence, what he did. He made a decision that I'm going to turn this into a teachable moment for the kids. I'm going to turn this into an opportunity for me to get closer to my family. You name it. He would probably now say that it was part of his life cycle, part of his life journey, and that he embraced it. So thank you for that question, because that's a fairly young diagnosis, about 45, I think it was 44, 45 when he was diagnosed.
So let me ask you this question then. Do you think that, are you suggesting attitude makes a difference?
Oh, no. Don't be foolish. Absolutely. Those determinants are your surroundings as well. My sister-in-law, I consider her one of my heroes. I actually nominated her for, we have a regional thing in our area of town called Angels. We nominate angels, and I nominated her as one of the angels, and she was given the angel. She got her wings. Because she embraced it. She didn't go, woe is me. She rolled her sleeves up and said, what do we need to do? How do we need to get him? And at a certain point, couldn't drive anymore, couldn't feed himself at a certain point. At one point, he was having difficulty sleeping. His tremors were driving her crazy in bed.
So let me then add the next attitude question. What do you think patients should, or people in general in our country, should have as an attitude towards expectation from healthcare?
Yes. Demand the best, and expect the best, and understand that you're not getting it. Understand you're not getting it. Don't stop fighting to get it. Because we're not ever going to stop changing and evolving our healthcare system. Every single political party has done things to both healthcare and education, and all of them have said, we're making it better. Every single party have said, we're making it better. So, from the perspective of this group, expect the best, demand the best, but you have to work on that in order to get it. Because there's another room of this size in every community with different needs of healthcare asking the same question. So when you add that in your mind, take this room, take a look around and say, this is this room, multiply that by 1,000, and ask yourself, are we realistic that we're going to get this perfect system? The answer is no. The answer could be, we're working on it. And watch what happens, and I can cite some examples. Watch what happens when a party does a misstep. They think they're doing the right thing because the people in the back room didn't really know too much about what the street people were doing. They make a change and say, hey, boss, this is a brilliant thing. We're going to save lots of money, and we're going to be able to say we're fixing the system. And we do it, and then all of a sudden, this mad rush of people come into the government and say, what the heck are you guys doing? And then they look at it and measure it, and they realize, uh-oh, we better back off. And they do. You know why? Because you guys put an X on a box. That's a cynical way of looking at it, but that's the reality. If you guys want to get elected again, you better not tick off the people that are going to vote for you. And the people start speaking louder, and the people start looking at it as a way, can we get things better? Can we improve things? Can we get, one thing at a time. 3 items on your wish list, being the long game, being respectful of the fact that every other room in the house, in the province, is looking for their 3 things in healthcare. Back a winner. And parties can learn how to, this is an expression I used for myself, and I use for you, and I use for politicians. Waltzing gracefully on a moving carpet.
Like it's,
How can you change? So I don't want to say step on a landmine, but go around the map, take your time, get there, you get there alive.
That's very good.
Okay, so another question. Let me pull this out of the wonderful hat. There's an indication that there's a growing body of evidence. I love that expression because it tends to say that I'm really smart. I read a research paper off the internet,
Yes.
and it says that Elvis is still alive. No, wait a minute. Sorry. Can removal of the appendix
No.
reduce risk of Parkinson's?
Next.
Next. There you go. I like that. Okay, here we go. How would you suggest they approach the provincial and federal governments to gain support for a national investment in finding a final cure for PD? Second, should PSSO join hands with all other PD fundraising support groups across Canada to plan a more universal voice in taking such an action? You might even have an idea on this, but let me share with you what I started before I left. I went to the government and said, Barack Obama did something that, in his first term, he did something that I thought was brave, and it needed a shakeup. And what he did was, he said, all you researching universities out there that are working on the brain, you're not competing for grants anymore. You're all working together and sharing information. And he made a lot of money available. And everybody got money, but it was not a competition for the money. That meant that if your university got it, I wasn't giving this university money. He redistributed it and created a brain research capacity. So I took that to the provincial government, and they implemented a brain caucus. So all of the issues surrounding the brain funneled up to this top organization that allowed many organizations to have a say. So we were all in a room at the same time, and we had Rett's syndrome, Tourette's syndrome, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, you name it. We had all those organizations in the same room, and they started having a chit-chat. My gosh, people, that's a smart way to move. Because what research goes on in Parkinson's, somebody that works on Alzheimer's might look over there and say, hey, wait a minute, you're trying this with this? Maybe that would work over here. So let's try it. And then what happens is, if there's no competition for the money, the people that fund it, that invite the government to be a player in the win game, W-I-N, if you want to win, give them a chance to join a winning team. So you invite them to participate and say, hey, why don't you run a pilot? You don't have to fund it all. Let's just run a pilot to see if we're working and on the right path here. And what you've noticed, I think, and I'll defer to you, countries are already there.
Yes.
There are other countries that are already there, and that's why you're over in Norway.
Yes.
That's why you're in Dubai. There's a pulling universally of people that's saying, you know what? My blood's red. Their blood's red. We're human beings. Wouldn't we want everyone to benefit from this research and be able to say Parkinson's gone because, right? I'll give you an example, quick example. Polio. Polio is a worldwide focus. And when the World Health Organization went with the Rotary clubs and everybody else poured money into it, all of a sudden, well, we've got some cases.
Yeah, basically gone, yeah.
But basically, we eradicated it. Why? Because A, we figured out how to do it, and B, we gave it to everybody.
Yeah. No, so
I'm sorry, I'm a universal politician. I think I'm going to run for the World Party. What do you think? Have I got your vote? All right, we're there. That's it. Okay.
It's interesting you say this, between Brexit and all the other things that are going on in terms of division of the world. But at the same time, in science, this collaboration does occur. I mean, very much so that we read journal articles that are, from different diseases. Actually, there's a set here of questions on dyskinesia that I will deal with in a minute.
Yep.
And so we are, in fact, collaborating like this. Now, in terms of having societies collaborate, that has been tried over the last 20, 25 years, and it always ends up not working. And I'm not exactly sure why that is, because, you're right, the mission is basically the same, to try and understand neurodegeneration. So as scientists, we call this entire package of neurodegeneration under one umbrella, whether it's ALS or whether it's Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's or its other brothers and sisters, we call this neurodegeneration. The mechanistics of each might be different. I think that the idea of collaboration is there at the science level. It's there at the granting level, for sure. Whether it'll occur at the society's level, that's beyond my knowledge base, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
So I have some questions for you.
There's set there, of a particular type of drug treatment directly.
Okay, what are the ideal windows for taking DOPA, Carbode, and Levo before and after meals? Elaborate on the critical timing of medication versus eating meals. And my husband takes Laradopa at 2-hour intervals, experiences extravenous, blah, 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 blah.
I read them.
You read them?
Yes.
And then, so give me the answer.
Yeah.
No, I want the answer right now.
So yeah, well, actually that I can answer. So the problem with, remember that first picture that I showed you with what's called the therapeutic window? That therapeutic window describes two things that occur in our bodies when we take any medication. The first one, technically we call pharmacokinetics. Like kinetic, things that move. So that means that when you take a pill by mouth, and by the way, one caveat, levodopa cannot be given rectally, right? So there are lots of people. No, I'm not joking. There are physicians here in our own hospital system who have, because somebody can't take it by mouth, it doesn't go up it's not been invented yet. Maybe that's something we should work on.
Don't picture that. We just had lunch. Stop.
So it has to be the other way. So that therapeutic window is made up of these two things: pharmacokinetics, where you take the pill, it goes into the system, gets absorbed, and is delivered to the brain, and then pharmacodynamic. Dynamic meaning what happens inside the brain in terms of being converted from levodopa to dopamine, being released by the brain cell, binding to the neuron on the other side, causing its thing. We don't have any control over that. We do have some control over how we get it down there. That's why I spent all that time saying, taking it with a lot of fluids, make sure it gets past the stomach, into the jejunum, don't eat proteins. 1 hour after the pill, eat proteins, and if worst comes to worst, move all your proteins to the end of the day even. So it's kind of difficult to have your 3 steaks and that 10 at night, but at the same time, try to have very concentrated protein drinks so that you get your enough protein during the day, but the rest of the time you're eating carbohydrates. The reason that we do all of this is because the pharmacokinetics is all we can control. The pharmacodynamics, what's happening at the brain cell level, I have no access to. So once those fluctuations and dyskinesia, which are the two things that are different, fluctuation meaning not getting a response to the drug when you think you should. And that's a pain, because if you know that at 10 o'clock I usually get a good response and tomorrow it doesn't work at 10, and that's when you plan to go out and do whatever, grocery shop, something, it doesn't work. So these dose failures, these are motor fluctuations. Dyskinesia are, of course, the abnormal choreic movements. Those dyskinesias and fluctuations occur because the therapeutic window becomes narrow pharmacodynamically, not kinetically. We can still get the drug in you, but once it gets in there, it's like walking into the room and then having, well, I decide to sit over there today, and then I decide to sit over here tomorrow. These fluctuations are random. In the middle part of the disease, for about 8-10 years, there's a linear relationship. Thankfully, you take the pill, it works in the brain, it's good. But beyond that 7-8-10 years, these fluctuations become like, pulling things from a hat. Anything could happen. So one of the part of that questions was the individual is getting dyskinesia when the drug is actually low. Well, there are two problems there. It is possible that you expect the drug to be low because I've told you that at 4 hours you should need the next medicine. But what if the pharmacodynamics was such that the drug was converted into dopamine, but the neuron said, I'm going to take a nap. And it releases that drug not 20 minutes when it's supposed to, but 2 hours later. So in fact, when the person is actually on, is not when they should be on. It's like having, right now for me, it's, 3 o'clock? It's 9 o'clock at night because I just flew from Norway yesterday. But it isn't 9, it's 2:45. So this kind of mismatch can occur. So you can get dyskinesia when you're up, dyskinesia when you're down. This is what we call fluctuations.
Okay, I've kind of packaged a few under a different heading, but this one is the really important one, and I've got to get to this one right away. Dave, you are such a good-looking stud. Do you want to go out?
Oh, I didn't ask that question, by the way, just to tell me.
Oh, sorry.
Will you give us funding for research, Dave?
I have a nasty side effect on people. What can I say? There are some questions here on causes. So one of them is welding fumes or external kinase to it. Muhammad Ali, they say the number of head shots. There's some famous NFL players that have got Parkinson's or
Michael J. Fox.
Michael J. Fox. Some of their actions externally created a problem. So in a nutshell, what are some of the things that they're looking at in terms of the causes of Parkinson's?
Very good. So there are two big branches. One is inheritance and genetic susceptibility. And we know that about 10% of the population has currently identified genes that are potentially risk factors for getting. That doesn't mean because you have the gene, you're going to get the disease. And the two common ones, or the two that are sort of spoken of most, are a gene called the LRRK2, LRRK2 mutation, and the Parkin mutation. So these are mutations where you have a higher risk of developing Parkinson's disease if you have them. Doesn't mean you will get it. However, many of us believe that that's not really typical Parkinson's disease because most of our patients don't have those genes. So for example, the LRRK2 mutation is very common in North African Arabs, but that's not, well, now we have people from that region in our country, so we have to think about these things. The second are environmental causes such as welding being one of them, carbon monoxide poisoning, or being exposed to fumes for a period of time. Yes, these things are toxic. Nobody really knows the extent of exposure of these things to be able to cause the kinds of conditions that we see. However, Parkinson's is around the planet. There's not a single country in the world that Parkinson's is not there. So you've got Parkinson's in Chengdu in China, to Indonesia, to New Delhi, to Dubai, to London, Ontario. So clearly, the diversity of the world's exposure, if there was some commonality, we would have had peaks of Parkinson's. That is not the case. MS, for example, does have such a prevalence of higher than the latitude of 50 degrees north or whatever, 60, I don't remember exactly now, I don't do that work, but there is, but not for Parkinson's disease. So even though genetics and exposure are links to getting Parkinson's disease, at the moment, there really are no real identifiers that say, oh boy, that, then clearly. So this is a multivariate, multi-hit issue.
Okay, that's good. And then in terms of, one more question on the diet part, someone put in vegan. If they eat vegan, if they're vegans.
No diet data.
No diet changes, and it doesn't.
Vitamin D is the only thing that we recommend.
There you go.
Yeah, vitamin D is something that we recommend that patients with PDT.
Okay, can you please comment on GDNF and if this is the future treatment?
Yeah, GDNF stands for glial-derived neurotrophic factor. Glial-derived. So these are factors that are proteins released to sustain neurons. That study was done about 10 years ago with GDNF and it failed.
Okay, which brings me to the next one, cell replacement. Japan is leading in Kyoto with a cell replacement therapy. Canada has not shown an interest in that.
Yep. Good.
Is there any other evidence that that should be pursued?
No. But the reason that, I mean, we had an excellent talk this morning for stem replacement. Problem is, this is a network problem in the entire brain. So this is not something restricted to the substantia nigra and dopamine neurons, because we clearly see over the years many, many symptoms that are non-dopaminergic, right? So for example, constipation, smell loss, depression, etc. All of these are very common in Parkinson's disease. None of them respond to levodopa therapy. So this is, so replacement with dopaminergic neurons in one region of the brain is a very small thing. So Canada is doing right and not investing billions of dollars into stem cell replacement therapies. Let the other people spend their money. If it works, then we'll institute it.
Yeah, sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
Another quick question. Sounds simple, but it's actually personal. It becomes front door grassroots. The concept of swallowing. I do know my brother had some difficulty and still has difficulties swallowing, but take that to the next level and say, how much of that has a follow-up concern for literally choking?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. So that symptom belongs to a group of symptoms that we briefly alluded to. Today was a treatment talk that couldn't cover everything on non-motor symptoms. And I've said numerous times now, for anxiety, for example, 50 to 80% patients have depression and mood disorder. Part of that is swallowing difficulty. And this is related to the discoordination of the swallowing mechanism. So if you are noticing this, you should get your family physician or your neurologist, whoever it is, to get a swallowing assessment done, but be prepared to take the recommendations from the speech pathologist that does the swallowing assessment. That's important because I'm going to be a little harsh, but don't waste their time, because if they tell you you've got to cut up your food into little bits and pieces and your hamburger has to be smushed, and you say, oh, well, I don't really want that. Well, but then why did you go and ask that opinion, right? So because if that's what they recommend, they're recommending it for your safety, right? I agree. I mean, so I was suggesting to somebody, one excellent question somebody else asked me in the break. So you can eat foods that are already mushed, like, for example, smoothies. You don't eat them solid, you eat. So make sure that you consume as many calories as you can with foods that are appropriate for that kind of diet, let's say, right? So eat yogurts and puddings and those kind of things that they recommend. And then otherwise, things that are not safe, don't eat those unsafe things in volume to give you calories, right? And so this is important in nutrition, so that not only do you need swallowing assessment, but a dietitian along with it to give you some dietary advice. Not specifically for Parkinson's, but for that particular recommendation.
So there are a couple of questions in here that talk about when taking medication, how soon after should you eat? When you're taking medication, I get hallucinations when I'm sleeping. A little bit of the side effects, because we've all seen the commercials. When they have to, by law now, if they advertise a drug on TV, they've got to tell you all the side effects. If I had any of those, I'm not going to take the medicine, especially the anal leakage one. I don't like that one. But anyway, these side effects have an impact on individuals that are taking medications for Parkinson's. Talk a little bit about that.
So that's very important, and in two different ways. Remember that I talked about these controlled trials. In the controlled trials, it is mandatory that patients report everything when they come back for follow-up, right? So if your hair turned gray over the last 3 years of the study, that is not a side effect of the product. However, that's something that is reported, and we divide those into adverse events and serious adverse events. Unfortunately, as part of the product monographs and what is shown on television, pharmaceutical companies have to report all of these adverse events. And so, yeah, it may be biologically completely unrelated, but it has to be reported, right? And so this is where your physician, and I gave you a quick example of the antidepressant and rosagiline. You might not remember it, but this is where there's a little interaction. Many times when I prescribe rosagiline for a patient, we'll get something back, and the pharmacist says, oh, well, that's contraindicated. However, we supersede that and say, no, no, I'm okay with that because we know that it's happened 1 in 150,000. So it's okay, but it was reported. So this is where side effects are important to discuss with your family physician. There are some that clearly have substantial side effects. Somebody asked me about anticholinergics, so drugs that we use for tremor treatment, rarely used in my clinic, but can cause a lot of hallucinations. Nighttime hallucinations are a very separate, important thing because sundowning effect can occur in many patients with cognitive impairment with Parkinson's disease, evening and nighttime cognitive decline, and with cognitive decline hallucinations. So there are some treatments that we use with that. Drugs such as pramipexole, ropinirole, the dopamine agonists we talked about, are usually not used after 6 p.m. for that reason, and only levodopa is used at bedtime. We also use antipsychotics at bedtime to treat those hallucinations at night. So Seroquel, clozapine are regularly used in the clinic. So you must discuss them with your family doctor.
So my brother went through several medications when his tremors were pronounced. And is there a mark that you hit that says, we're going to stop doing this because it's not effective, like 2 weeks, a month, a year? And why do they move to the next one? Is it basically an experiment with the brain and the medication to see if it stops the tremors?
So if it's just specifically tremor, that is true. It depends on the age. Your brother was young, so I would have used the anticholinergic drugs, whether it's Parcetan or trihexyphenidyl. These are drugs that are traditional. These are 100-year-old drugs that were the only drugs available for treatment of Parkinson's disease before levodopa, and they help tremor. The problem is those anticholinergic drugs cause a lot of side effects, including memory problems, confusion, balance difficulty, urinary retention, and most of our patients are indeed in that age group where these are all risks. So we don't use them for tremor very much. Now, as far as titration of levodopa, people ask me, what is the maximum with levodopa? Well, with the other drugs, pramipexole and ropinirole, there are maxima that we know. That with pramipexole, it's 1.5, 3 times a day, and we don't go above that. With levodopa, there is no such maximum. With levodopa, we titrate it up to tolerated. There are patients on 2,000 milligrams of levodopa. So this duodopa pump, it has 2,000 milligrams in it. And so optimized treatment rather than maximized treatment is a rule for levodopa, which means that at some point in time, you say, okay, 6 months, and this is good, I'm happy. I have a rule of thumb now, having treated over 10, 12, 15,000 Parkinson's patients at least, that at 3-4 years, this is where I'd like to see. This is why one of the other questions was, why is it that we recommend that don't go to see other people once you come to us? This is because I have a plan in my mind, right? I have seen patients go from 0 to 25 many, many times. And if physicians outside are going to play around with my plan, then I can't actually help, because it's not fair to ask us to adjust medications that somebody else is changing outside. It has nothing to do with the competence of the other physician. It is because of the fact that there's a method. You don't ask 3 electricians to come and work on your home because it just doesn't work right? And so this is where the management has to be taken over. Not because we want to, we've got too many patients as it is. It's because that's the best option that I can see what's going to happen to this individual having seen 2,000 patients like that with that phenotype. Now, if I do that manipulation, chances are, it doesn't work every time, but it works 80% of the time.
So the idea would be the patient should be active in the process
Absolutely.
to ensure that the attending physician understands what's happening with the medication.
Absolutely. So what
Because
I actually, sorry.
You expect them to be able to tell you the tremors are weaker, they're smaller in between time, and when I get to see you, that goes back to your plan. I get to say with you, we're going to change this a little bit because.
Absolutely. There are, again, a couple of points I want to make with respect to that. When I talk to my patients, I actually use the word as much as I can, not every time, is that it's a contract between the patient and caregiver and my team. It's a you're my eyes and ears at home. We're only spending 20, 30 minutes with you every 6 months. In fact, to try to mitigate that scenario, one of the projects in my lab, which is just finished actually, is to use sensor-based technology. So we've devised, maybe and some of you have even participated, seen, if you go online, you'll find it because there was news reports on this. Body sensors, completely wireless with a little tablet that you take home with you. That's actually what's going to be used in Norway, by the way. That's one of the things I'm providing them in these 4 cities, is the tech to be able to have these devices objectively monitor patients rather than having to come all the way to clinic and tell me, oh yeah, 3 months ago, that Thursday night, I can't remember, right? So what I would do is send the device home with the patient. We're just at the cusp of being able to make this in-home monitoring system. So instead of bringing the patient to the expert, you try to take the expert to the patient. Say, do the assessment in your own ecologically valid environment, which is your home. I want to see how you're doing at 2 in the afternoon on a Sunday when I'm not going to be able to see you. So this is coming. This is the next phase of one of the other questions with artificial intelligence. Well, we haven't figured out the real one yet to make artificially yet, but the idea of using machines to be able to capture in-home data.
My intelligence has been artificial for a very long time. That brings me up to another part of the question in terms of balancing other medications with that. Again, patient informing the doctor and the doctor making sure they know they're taking high blood pressure pills or cholesterol pills or whatever else. You would know what that combo means and what adjustments would have to make, and you would share that with your patient.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is where the difficulty, and I was talking briefly about cannabis as an example, is that these drugs interact with each other a lot. And so their pharmacotherapy, whether it is taking X or Y, whichever drug you want to take, it is medication. So you've got to treat it like medication, and we try our best to not tread on other people's territory, especially drugs that are protecting somebody's heart. I'm not about to change that, but we have to manipulate those things. So you might see I'm changing a blood pressure pill. I'm changing something else which is not part of our therapeutic, an antidepressant or an antipsychotic, very commonly, to be able to adjust with our medications.
And that goes back to the communication piece,
yes.
where if I'm hallucinating at night, you got to know, and then you can make your adjustments and help them kind of get through it.
Absolutely.
The patient should not, on their own, decide, I had a bad dream last night, I'm not taking my medication tomorrow.
No. That's, you bring a very important point to the forefront. These drugs carry side effects on withdrawal. Don't stop them, right? And so there's mortality associated with randomly stopping these drugs, right? So you can have a serious side effect, and so and people can die from it. So don't do that.
Now that he's scared you to death, don't watch those commercials about what the drugs are saying. A person has an individual issue here. Let me explain this one because I saw my brother doing this a while ago. This person's problem is small, hurried steps when coming to a doorway and turning into a narrow space. What measures can be taken, or is there something that can be done to offset that to ensure that the person's fear factor gets reduced because they know what's going on and how to adjust?
So again, very important. This is actually what's called freezing of gait. And those scenarios of narrow doorways or cluttered environments like this are precipitants of that. In home, you can't do much about the doorways because they're fixed to the wall, but you can certainly try and avoid sudden movement. So for example, a common scenario, you're at the sink, maybe you're doing some light dishes or something, and you've got a pot, kettle boiling, and kettle boils, and you turn quickly on the spot. That's when the freezing will occur. You say, no, that kettle is not going to blow up. 1, 2, 3, step 1, step 2. So this is the kind of retraining. So uncluttering the space, making sure that in cluttered space, which you can't avoid, take your time, just stop. Doesn't have to be something that you've got to, if there's a doorway, stop, march on the spot 2 or 3 times. There are lots of these tricks that we teach. Make a big C loop, for example, if there's room. And then this is the group that we're actually doing the spinal cord stimulation that we talked about before. Those people that are having this happen constantly, this freezing of gait, forward falls, and not responding to medication. So that's where the spinal cord stimulation idea is all about, if you qualify for that.
So that brings up spinal cord research, because similarly to the brain, spinal cord research has an impact on various types of problems.
Yes.
So where does Parkinson's fit in spinal cord research?
So that's very interesting because we really currently are doing serious research as to why our spinal cord stimulation patients benefited to begin with from something that is not really a spinal cord disease, but a brain disease. And the construct behind this is that the brain needs to understand where the legs are and tell it what to do when the legs are where they are. And the thought is, we haven't figured this out yet, but we're doing work on this, is that when we put these stimulators on the spinal cord, because they're not actually inserted into the cord, they're lying on top, and we turn on the current, whatever signal that's going up through the spinal cord seems to be enhanced, and we see brain mapping. But don't quote me on this. This is still very cutting edge stuff that we haven't figured out yet. But it still does make a difference. At 3 years, we're still seeing benefit in these patients. But this is not a placebo response. Now, what I say, if it is, who the hell cares? I mean, if people are walking at 3 years, it's a placebo, fine, let's do that then.
Yeah, so I mentioned that my brother received the deep brain stimulation.
Yes.
Is that continuing?
Yes.
Are we still, and is it going in different directions, or is it improving?
Yes,
Speak to that.
so yeah, that's a very good question. The deep brain stimulation, so we've done about 250 or so in my hands, and with Dr. Jenkins, I don't know exactly how many, but she's done quite a few. We don't do the procedure, the surgeons do the procedure in programming. So yeah, in London, probably 300 patients, but you can imagine, I said I've got about 4,000 patients, so it's less than 10% that actually get it. It is invasive therapy, and it has to be, again, lots of inclusion-exclusion criteria. The new thing in DBS is the technology. So in the past, we used to put an electrode in that had just 4 big contacts, and you try to put in current because you put in a pacemaker and put in current and then just take what you get. But now technology has come to market, and we use it regularly now, which are called directional leads, which means that the electrode is there, but instead of having one blob of a contact like this, the contact is cut into multiple small parts, which means that you can program the contact to have the current flow this way or that way. This is called directional programming. But you can imagine programming 4 contacts takes us an hour. 8 contacts times 4, 32 contacts, I'm going to be retiring by the time I do 1. So this is the problem with these technologies, that we don't yet have easy ways to program them, but they are, I mean, this is where the technology is.
And there's just a couple of more that you've covered most of these. For those that are interested in this, brain banks. My understanding is that there's this trend towards banking the brain and using it in the future.
So for the Parkinson Society of Southwestern Ontario funded a brain bank for us here, and I've been, and I'm very happy that they funded this, but I'm also a skeptic of brain banks in general. And the reason for that is obvious, because by the time you actually get tissue from patients, they've had disease for many, many years. And so the problem remains, if you had 20 years of Parkinson's disease with all of these drugs that you've been exposed to, maybe you've had DBS, etc., then what is it at the end of the day that you're going to see in that brain that is going to give you a clue as to the beginning, right? And so it's not like physics where you can go back and look at radio frequency waves and say, oh, the Big Bang occurred 15 billion years ago and this is what happened there. We can't do that with degenerative disease. We can't dial it back because it's not linear and every patient is different. However, the reason I wanted the funding for this was, and we've started a brain bank, and by the way, I should make it clear, if you're not our patient and we have not seen you for 5 years, I cannot by law take your brain, because it's not something, you
can have mine.
Well, yes, so you can consent as a control, actually, jokes apart, but you cannot as a patient, because legally I cannot look up your medical records, right? So by privacy and our HIPAA and PIPA laws, I can't go and look at your medical records. If I have no medical records, there's no point having the brain in my brain tissue bank, because I know nothing about the person. So it is not correct, and we've had requests from patients, well, 8 years ago, my husband, wife, whatever was your patient, and it's not possible, because the records are not complete, and there's no use for that tissue. So we have a brain bank, we're extremely grateful to the PSSO, but we're behind, right? So in Norway, my collaborator, Harris Schulich, has over 150 brains in his brain bank. Again, the problem remains. They are patients who have had disease for a long time. We can get some idea about chemistry, but not for the beginnings of the disease.
Finally, somebody asks, how do patients, or how do you help patients identify when they're on or when they're off?
Yeah. So the best way, believe it or not, that we do this all the time, is if you're not clear, we will bring you in to our clinic, outpatient, in the off state, which means that 16 hours of no medicine. And that's safe, because that's done regularly for pre-surgical screening. So you come in the morning at 8:30, and if we've determined that that's the case, that you need it, and we examine you in the off state, bring your pills with you. After we've examined you in the off state, then we will give you the pills, and then you sit outside in the clinic while we run our regular clinic and say, I think, on now. And if in front of us, now this is not the same as on a daily basis at home, but at least it tells you, because there are many patients who say, the drug doesn't work. And of course, when we do this, you see that there's a 60% benefit, and you say, oh my God, I didn't really realize. So that's one of the best ways of doing it. I wouldn't do it at home though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A question from the audience? Certainly.
Yeah, so movement disorder specialists are those that have done fellowships in movement disorders, and I run a fellowship program for, Toronto has one, and then it's us, and then after that there's one in Ottawa, but that's about it. In the region, there's, I should shift a little bit. Difference between a movement disorder specialist and a Parkinson's doctor. So that means that people that look at geriatricians, for example, do look after Parkinson patients, but they're not movement disorder specialists, because in addition to Parkinson disease, we also do Tourette's and ataxia and Huntington disease and all those other things which are not. So movement disorder, I give Botox, I have 500 patients, I do Botox, which has nothing to do with Parkinson disease. So these patients, not wrinkles and things, it's medical use. So, just to be clear, so a movement disorder specialist is somebody like that. A Parkinson's specialist is somebody that over the years has seen many Parkinson patients. But I wouldn't say it's dangerous, but it is because they're not up to speed on all of the latest things that are changing. And so ideally, yes, you should be seen in a Parkinson's movement disorder specialist clinic. There are 3 of us that do movement disorders / mainly Parkinson's disease. Dr. McDonald is a specialist in that. Dr. Jenkins and I do movement disorders as well. And then outside, there's Dr. Dan Mendonca here. But you're right, outside of these few, all the way to Hamilton is nobody. Right? So west of Hamilton, it's just the 3 of us here.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to offer you an opportunity to show your appreciation to this wonderful medical doctor who has provided us in Ontario with fantastic service. And thank you so much for helping bring some clarity.
Thank you very much, Dave.
Yeah, I think he deserved that.
Oh,
fabulous.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, well, thank you. Oh, my goodness. Oh, wow. Thank you.